Welcome everybody to the 2022 Membership Madness Bracket. We're so excited to have you guys back for this awesome event. We put this on each year for all those new members and those referrals that we receive during the month of March. It's an exciting time. It might be renewal season for some, but it's also just the first steps for some of our new faces and new names. So without further ado, my name is Daniel Fox. I am with the IWO. I am the Community Engagement Manager, and I'm so excited to be bringing this back to you today. It's one of the most fun things we do each year, and it's simple. It's a lighthearted event. There's no CEUs involved in this, but there's also a lot on the line. So I have my trusty bracket guide here in the studio with me, as well as I will be displaying the bracket on screen as we go through this with the coin flips to see who will move on each round and who will be one step closer to a free IWO sponsored educational offering. So we're changing up this year. It's been a conference in the past, but this year we're focusing on education, and we're so excited because our educational offerings are the best they've ever been. We have options online, we have self-studies, we have the live online with the instructor. So many options for you to choose from for whoever that winner is. And we're so excited to find out who that will be. So without further ado, I'll go over a few of the rules here. Very simple. We'll be following a traditional 64-person bracket. And moving on from our bracket each time will be the winner decided by the trusty coin flip. For all of our viewers at home, the heads will be whoever's the top name is, and tails will be the name on the bottom of the two going head to head. There's no traditional seeding. Everyone has the same chance, but we'll work through each region or group if you're familiar with the tournament format, and we'll find out who will be the winner of that region, and then we'll move on to the next one. So, without further ado, we'll just go ahead and get started. And our first matchup here I see is Gerald versus Shelly, and let's do the inaugural coin flip. And moving on is Shelly. Our next matchup here is Nicole and Eldridge. And moving on, we have Eldridge. All right, our next matchup here is between Jonathan and Daniel. And moving on, we have Jonathan. Next matchup here is Gary versus Andy. And looks like moving on, we have Gary. Awesome. Next up, we have Joshua and Shakita. And moving on, we have Shakita. We have next up in our matchup here is Gregory versus Joan. And moving on, we have Joan. Next up, we have Travis versus Catherine. And looks like we have Travis winning that matchup. Awesome. And our last first round of this region, we have Joseph versus Adrian. And we have Adrian moving on. Like I said before, we're going to stay in this region until we reach a winner for this, and then we'll move on to the next one. So continue with this group. We have Shelly versus Eldridge. And moving on, we have Eldridge. Next up, we have Jonathan versus Gary. And moving on is Jonathan. Next up, we have Shakita versus Joan. And moving on from that matchup is Joan. And next up we have Travis versus Adrian. And we have Travis winning that matchup. Moving right along, we have Eldridge versus Jonathan. And looks like we have Eldridge moving on in that matchup. Next up we have Joan versus Travis. And moving on is Travis. So this next coin flip, we'll see who wins the, what I'm calling the East region. These regions aren't gonna have any specific geographical correspondence to where these members might be located, but just to kind of play into the season of brackets and tournaments, we just kind of nicknamed them that. So moving on to see who wins this region is Eldridge versus Travis. And moving on is Travis. Congratulations, Travis. All right, next we're gonna move on to our next region. All right, with further ado, we'll kick off this region. We have Dennis versus Diane. And moving on is Dennis. Awesome. Next up, we have Bridger versus Kylie. It looks like we have Kylie winning that. Next up, we have Connie versus Corey. And Corey takes that matchup. Next up, we have Roland versus Irene. Oop, drop that one. We're gonna do that one again. So, you know, there's gonna be a few of these drops here, so bear with me. We're gonna redo that one here. We have Roland versus Irene. And moving on is Roland. Next up, we have Stuart versus Patricia. And moving on is Stuart. Next up, we have Bobby versus Randy. And moving on is Randy. Next up, we have Robert versus Jeff. And moving on is Robert. And finally, in this first round of this region, we have Francine versus Christopher. All right, and moving on is Francine. So keeping with this region, we're gonna do our next matchup here is Dennis versus Kylie. And moving on is Kylie. Next up, we have Corey versus Roland. And moving on is Corey. Next up, Stuart versus Randy. And Randy is taking that matchup. And next up is Robert versus Francine. And Francine is our winner of that. So next round here, we have Kylie versus Corey. And it looks like we have Corey taking that matchup. And to face Corey in the West region final will be either Randy or Francine. And it looks like it'll be Randy. So here in our final matchup at the West, we have Corey versus Randy. And moving on is Corey. Congratulations, Corey. For those who just joined us again, we're just going to be going down with the trusty coin flip bracket region by region. And the winner of this coveted tournament will be the fine recipient of a free IWO-sponsored educational offering. So many choices to choose from, so many formats, and it's the best time to win one of these prizes because the education is the best it's been. So we're so excited. And without further ado, we're going to move on to our next region. All right, and kicking off the first round here for the South region will be Justin versus Trina. And looks like moving on here, we have Trina. Next up, we have Ed versus Emily. And we have Ed taking that one. Next up, we have Christopher versus Mary. And moving on, we have Mary. Next up, Allison versus Tamara. We have Allison versus Tamara. Excuse me, Tamara. And moving on is Tamara. Next up, we have Alonzo versus Anashai. And moving on, we have Alonzo. Next up, we have Verdina versus Latrice. And Latrice takes that matchup. Next up, we have Timothy versus Steven. And we have Steven winning that. And the last matchup of the first round in the South, we have Karen versus Mary Beth. And winning, we have Karen. Awesome. Keeping with this group, we're gonna move right along here to Trina versus Ed. And moving on, we have Trina. Next up is Mary versus Tamara. And looks like we have Tamara taking that. Next up, we have Alonzo versus Latrice. And Latrice, moving on. Next matchup is Steven versus Karen. And it looks like we have Steven taking that. Next up, we have Trina versus Tamara. And the winner of that matchup is Trina. Next up, we have Latrice versus Steven. All right, and it looks like Latrice is gonna win that. And this next matchup to see who wins the South region, if you will, is gonna be Trina or Latrice. Whoop, almost dropped that one. We're gonna just do that again because it was sliding all over the place. And we have Latrice. Congratulations, Latrice. And we will move down to our fourth and final region to see who wins that one. All right, moving right along to our fourth region, the Midwest region, if you will. We have our first matchup here of Kelly versus Darren. Dropping the core all over the place. We'll do that one more time. Kelly versus Darren. And moving on, we have Darren. Next up, we have Jeff versus Corey. And looks like Jeff wins that matchup. Next up is Nancy versus Taylor. And it looks like we have Taylor. Next up, we have Hayden versus James. And moving on is James. Next up, we have Eric versus Ron. And looks like we have Ron winning that matchup. Next up is Joshua versus Crystal. And moving on is Joshua. Next up, we have Andrew versus Kimberly. And Kimberly takes that one. And the final matchup in the first round of this region is Lonnie versus Jonah. And looks like we have Lonnie moving on. Moving right along here, we're gonna have Darren versus Jeff. And Jeff takes that one. Next up, we have Taylor versus James. And it looks like we have Taylor. Next up, Ron versus Joshua. And looks like Joshua takes that one. And next up, we have Kimberly versus Lonnie. And Kimberly takes that. So a couple more flips here for this region, and we'll move on to our last group. You're probably asking, what am I looking at here? Here in the IWO Studios, which is sponsored by Tyler Technologies, we have I have my trusty bracket behind you guys here as I can play along with you as we go through this live for you. So I appreciate you guys bearing with me with the coin drops along with the flips, and we're gonna make the best of it. So moving right along here, we're gonna keep going with the Midwest region, and we have Jeff versus Taylor. And looks like Jeff will take that matchup, and then we have Joshua versus Kimberly. And Joshua. So one more coin flip to see who moves on and wins the Midwest region and heads to the last four that will compete for that free IWO sponsored educational offering. So without further ado, Jeff versus Joshua. And we have Jeff. Awesome, congratulations, Jeff. So again, for anyone who may have just joined us, we are down to the last four individuals who will be competing through the trusty coin flip for the IWO sponsored educational offering grand prize. Again, we have so many awesome choices for you to choose from in terms of education. The team is doing wonderful things here at headquarters, and we can't wait for you to experience that. If you haven't taken some of our courses with us, you're in for a treat. So we'll move on here to our final group of new members, and without further ado, let's move on with our coin flips. All right, just 3 more flips to go here, and we're gonna just keep moving along. We are so excited to give away this grand prize, so without further ado, we have Travis versus Corey. And moving into the final matchup, we have Travis. Congratulations, Travis. And let's see who will face Travis with Latrice or Jeff. And we have Latrice, so we have our final matchup here. So excited with you guys have worked so hard for this. I can't believe I've only dropped this a handful of times. It should be way worse, so I appreciate your patience. But here, without further ado, again, we have our final matchup of Travis versus Latrice. Let's see who wins. And the winner is Travis. Congratulations, Travis. This is awesome. We're so excited for you. We will be in touch. We'll be reaching out. Hopefully you're watching live with us now, but we'll be reaching out to you shortly after this to confirm your winnings and chatting with you and make sure you get that. So again, we can't thank you enough. While there's only, essentially, this one grand prize, we can't thank our members enough, or those of you who have been members for a while who might have referred some of these new members to us. It's fun to do these activities for you guys as a group. It's, I know the years can be long, and You know, courses might be tough, and you know, getting to conference can be hard. So it's fun to do these kind of fun, you know, little celebrations of you. And you know, we've got some great feedback on this in the past, so we're so excited to be able to do this with you again this year. You know, switching it up. We used to be conference giveaways. This year, it's an awesome educational prize. So the first ever giveaway in terms of IWO education related to this event. So again, congratulations, Travis. I'd like to thank my trusty team here in the studio, helping me, keeping me straight, making sure, you know, I got all of our flips correct, or if I dropped it, did it again. But huge thanks to my team and the membership department for helping me get through this. And so, you know, we'll hopefully see you guys back next year. You know, if you didn't win, maybe get that referral in next March, and maybe you can get your name entered in the bracket as well. So we want to thank you guys all for your participation and ongoing membership with IWO. We couldn't do this without you, and we're happy to serve you guys. So thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.